Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fold Academy. I'm so glad that everyone could join us today. As you know, we have Annahid here with us. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, please put them in the Q&A box and they will be answered at the end. Yeah, so if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please go ahead. My name is Janisha Lewinson, and I'm the communications coordinator at The Fold, which is the Festival of Literary Diversity. The Fold takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Indigenous territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee nations. As we acknowledge the land, we also commit to our increasing of our own awareness, understanding, and conscientious action. We are committed to making Fold safe spaces for all of those who share a mutual care and respect for others, and we encourage all of our guests to do the same, to honor the space by respecting those who have gathered here as well. You are currently tuning in to this season's third Fold Academy session workshop called Digging for Truth in Memoir Writing with Annahid Dashtgard. Annahid Dashtgard is the author of the nonfiction bestsellers Bones of Belonging and Breaking the Ocean. She is also the CEO of Anima Leadership, a renowned equity and inclusion consulting firm offering a compassionate approach to racial justice. Like I said before, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box as they'll be answered in the end. If you require any captions, please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to be turning off the comments in just a moment, the chat in just a moment now. Yeah, so now it's time to bring on Annahid.
Hello, how delightful to be here. Janisha, I wonder, can we leave the chat open just for another second?
Yeah, sure.
Everybody, delighted that you're making time on your Saturday to be part of this. I will just say it's actually pronounced Annahid. So,
I'm so sorry about
Oh,
that.
no, that's okay. No, I was just actually saying for everyone's, it looks like it's pronounced Annahid, but just wanted to let folks know. Great to see. I'm noticing folks from, hi, Winifred, England, Hamilton, Nova Scotia, Kamloops. So welcome wherever you're joining from. Thunder Bay, welcome, Saskatchewan. I wanted to just ask folks, what are you writing? And some of you may not be, but you're thinking about it. So just give me a little sense of, are you writing a memoir? And if you have your topic, if you feel comfortable sharing that, or are you writing kind of in the process of a book of essays, or just want to get a sense of what folks are, what you're dreaming up for yourselves, like what brought you here? Okay, lovely. Yeah. So Brown Girl in a White Village, family memoir, short creative nonfiction essays. Okay. Short stories centered around Armenian identity, writing my mother's memories. Oh, lovely. Great. Art, activism, education, and healing. Great. I love the breadth here. Braided essay, origin story. Transcribing. Great. After I published my first book, so some of you may know a motherhood memoir. Well, that's lovely. Refugee story. These are all books that I would pick up. After I published the first memoir, my editor said to me, it would be really great if you wrote a fiction book, you could, take your experiences as an inclusion consultant and write something that I think would be really interesting. And I thought about it for a period of time. And I, in fact, even drafted a fictional, a novel that was, even went to 15,000 words, and then thought, what am I doing? For sure, I could push myself to write a novel, but nonfiction is infinitely more courageous. And I think when we write it from a place where we are telling our truth to the best of our ability in the moment that we are writing, it impacts in a way that fiction doesn't. And I don't want to say that fiction isn't impactful, because of course there's incredibly powerful novels out there, but it's a different come from place. So I just want to say that everybody that is here, if you're writing nonfiction, you can only write your story that is unlike any other story that exists, even if it's on the same theme or topic as someone else. And the most important thing that I want to say from the get-go in writing memoir is that you have to trust your story, and you have to trust your voice, and hold on to it through the process. You will get more feedback from more people the further along you go. But I would really say in the early stages to just write until you feel good about what you're writing and what it is before you show it to other people, so that you're not swayed. So you can really ground yourself in the truth of your story and hold on to that. And we need a lot more stories, I think, especially from people that have not had the power to tell their stories in the past. Okay, so I have 5 pointers, and I decided that because I use PowerPoint all the time in my work, I wanted today to be more organic, more conversational. So I'm going to use something that I'm going to just use my cue cards here. If you have thoughts or questions as we go along, I think, I don't know but I'm happy if you want to put them into the chat and we can come back to it after. Or I think if the chat is Janisha, is the chat turned off?
The chat's still on. I can keep it open if you like. Or if you prefer,
yeah,
I can just
keep it open, and then why don't I just put this? So I'll just put a start here, just so I know where I'm going back to. So if you have thoughts or questions, you're welcome to put them into chat. Just know I'm not going to get to them until the end, but we can just have if you're worried about losing your thought, at least we have a running thing here. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, as Janisha introduced me, I work in the area of equity and inclusion, advocacy and education. I've been doing that work for 17 years through our company, Anima Leadership. And before that, I was involved in political organizing and social advocacy. I've written 2 books, Breaking the Ocean, a memoir of race, rebellion, and reconciliation, came out in 2019. And the latest book, Bones of Belonging, Finding Wholeness in a White World, is memoir-ish, but is more a collection of nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, not sort of stories, not sort of a blend of essay and story. And there's 10 main stories and then smaller vignettes woven in between. Okay. All right. So set up your structure. Truth is to be, I think, really, it's easier when we know what we're looking for. Each one of us, there's a million truths that are buried there, connected to different strands of our life experience. And so the first thing around really digging for truth is just figuring out what's the container for my story. This is kind of loosely how I visioned it for each of my books. Like, what's the takeaway idea or theme that I'm writing my story around, knowing that 5 years from now, it might be a different theme. But having that in mind helps determine what truths you go digging for. So there's a kind of the meta theme, and then what structure am I using? There's many structures for writing memoir. There's a soup to nuts, which is like just pure chronology. There's, as some of you have pointed out, there's writing essays like Alicia Elliott's A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. There is a chronological order where you're sort of going in flashbacks. There is sort of more essay format, like Sarah Polley's running from the danger, which is I think she wrote 5 or maybe 6 kind of main essays on different themes, which again is different than Alicia Elliott's, where there was kind of more, it was a little bit more, they were essays, but they contained more from her life and kind of a little bit more chronology than Sarah Polley's did. So there's many different structures available. So how are you going to kind of put it together? And then there's the themes or the sub-elements that you're weaving across the structure that you put in place. So I'm going to give an example from each of my books. I would love if the books mentioned could be added in the chat at some point. Are you able to do that, Janisha, and put a link to them?
Yeah, sure thing.
You could just pull from Amazon. I mean, I'm not pushing Amazon, but it can be the easiest to just, or whatever you want to do. I don't want to forget I mentioned the A word. I do not want to promote Amazon here. Breaking the Ocean was my first book. It was a memoir. And essentially, it was a memoir. I wanted to write the book that I didn't see on the shelves growing up about what it means to be a brown person growing up in a white dominant country. So very in a nutshell, I immigrated from Iran to a small white town in Alberta when I was 9 and faced overt racism for many years growing up, but didn't know how to make meaning of that because we didn't talk about it and it wasn't part of the culture at that point. So I thought the problem was me, and it manifested in many ways for me growing up in some positive ways where I got involved in political advocacy around undoing systems of oppressive power, but also in many personally unhealthy ways where I struggled with an eating disorder and other addiction things for many, many years. And the turning point was September 11th, where all the unresolved ghosts of past racial trauma came to the surface because of the racist backlash that was happening. And then I had to really go into my own healing journey and what that looked like and the gifts of that and how that came out in my work. So the structure for that, this book, Breaking the Ocean. So the theme for that was racial trauma. And again, I needed to, I heard this, someone say that 90%, no, something like 90% or more of writing is thinking. And I would say that in my experience is true. Some people need to write and write and write before they really get to what their theme is. I spent a lot of time thinking about, because the theme could have also been woven in racial trauma, but the main theme could have been around, for example, political advocacy, or it could have been what the experience of immigration is like. So, but no, the theme for me was racial trauma, which meant that I had to tie everything that I kind of wrote about to that main theme. Like that was the linchpin. And then my structure, I decided to do a soup to nuts memoir, which means chronological order. And I broke that down into 3 chunks. So there was my early life, which was really writing about my early experiences around race, not realizing I was brown until I came to North America. That was really putting into place my learning around racial identity, primarily through experience, because I didn't have a theoretical framework at that point. And then the middle section in my 20s and 30s was rebellion. And this is the title of the book. It's Breaking the Ocean, a memoir of race, rebellion, and reconciliation. So I consciously broke my life timeline into those 3 chunks. And rebellion was capturing the years of political advocacy and how that, in many ways, was life-saving because it took my anger at what had happened and channeled it in a positive direction to make broader social change. And then the last section is was sort of late 30s, 40s onward to midlife, reconciliation. So this was a period after September 11th, where I needed to go and do the deeper healing work. For me, I kind of wrote it as a bit of a screenplay where I kind of the climax of the book happens towards the end of this second section, kind of like the classical screenplay where the climax and then the third part of the movie is making sense, or the person has gotten their main lesson and now they have to pick up the pieces and move on. So the crux of the climax of the book, if you like, was September 11th, and how that radically shifted what I was dealing with internally and what my life looked like from the outside. So I left political activism and I kind of really shifted my internal reality and my external reality as well. Then there are the themes that I wove throughout the entire book that had to each connect to the bigger theme of racial trauma. So there are themes like body is a big theme, how our body carries the truth of what we can't recognize. And so our body sends signals to wake our consciousness up so that we can integrate unprocessed experiences. I think if we're writing memoir, if we're writing truth, connecting to what our bodies carry is a major piece of what we're working with. There was a theme of immigration and exile. There was a lot around family and relationships to my family and how those shifted over time, and my intimate partner. Purpose, like what it means to how we contribute to the world depending on our location and as we change over time. So there were other themes as well. For my second book, Bones of Belonging, the structure was different. I was pulling from similar, what's the word? A similar kind of area, thematic area, but it was different. And so for Bones of Belonging, the meta theme obviously was belonging. And I chose a structure of, I'm going to think about belonging through a set of 10 key relationships. So what does it mean to belong to the land? What does it mean to belong in our own bodies, in a marriage, to an ancestral lineage, to a deeper sense of purpose? And then how do you reconcile belonging and power? So there were 10 major things. And then I had sort of 3 to 5 vignettes between each of the major themes. And then again, I wove through the book the theme of racial identity. So racial identity wasn't the major theme in Bones of Belonging, but it was one of the major sub themes. Again, body was a theme. How do we live in our bodies? How do others perceive our body when we're in non-white skin? What do our bodies carry? How do we heal what's held in the body? Healing and hope was another theme. I didn't want to write about racial identity this time from a trauma place. I wanted to write about it truthfully and meaningfully, but in a spirit of hope and connection. And I think the more we investigate parts of our identity that are hidden from us, that don't have a place in the world, we bring healing not just to ourselves and our communities, but to the world at large. So I wanted the book to be something that somebody could pick up and be inspired by. So it had a different tone as well. So this healing and hope theme was stronger than it was in Breaking the Ocean, although it was there. Family was a theme. And again, social change. How do we create change? How do we bring wholeness was a theme. Again, we all have a different process. I would say you need to trust your own process. But for me, without having a structure, finding truth would have been a lot harder. In other words, like this guided me to go into what I needed to pull out and to stick with what I needed to pull out. So I'm going to just give a little example of one of the vignettes in the book, Bones of Belonging, that I placed connected to the theme of ancestry. And you'll see in this vignette how this theme illustrates belonging, is connected to the idea of ancestry, but pulls on some of these sub-themes below. And it's short. So this one's called Roses. I have spent too long assuming that people who are happy most of the time are innately predisposed are innately predisposed that way by virtue of genes or through the ease of privilege. As I've gotten older, I realize how much contentment is also a choice. What we focus on, what emotions we hold on to, how we make meaning of what happens to us. I coach my 6-year-old son, who too often answers the question, "How was your day?" with bad, awful, terrible. Now that I'm on to him, I'll ask him to choose 3 good things before he tells me anything bad. I have various strategies to coax, tease, push these positive things out of him, but mostly I tell him, we have to train your brain to see all the good things along with the hard ones. There are usually more roses than thorns. I am trying to teach him what it has taken me half a lifetime to learn. He tells me one day that there are actually more thorns on the stem than the one rose on top. He's sharp. I laugh, yet I persist. Depression and anxiety run in both his bloodlines, stamped in through war, revolution, and exile. I worry he has inherited the generational impact of so much loss with his sensitivity and how hard he can be on himself. What I forget sometimes is that our ancestors also feasted and fought, loved and laughed. They lived, they survived, they were resilient. They remind me that my job as a parent is not to dethorn my son's young life and simply hand the roses over, as tempting as that may be. What type of ancestor would that make me? Sorry, what type of ancestor would that make him? Rather,
okay, I found this on the web. For what type?
Rather, as he gets pricked, and even as the blood drips down, I want him never to lose sight of those wild pink petals yonder and above, curved gently toward the sun, always ready to receive the tender gift of light. So that just gives a quick example of how one of the pieces, sub-pieces, were connected into one of the themes of one of the 10 main essay pieces, which illustrated belonging and kind of wove in these themes below. You can create your structure in any way. For some of us, it may be a lot looser. Others of us, we might kind of have a whole thing of like Post-its and subpoints, but figure out what feels enough for you to get started on the process where you're really going in to dig your truth. Okay. The second point of the five tips is finish the draft. So I'd say the hardest thing is to, like, someone gave me this metaphor, which I found really helpful. Don't stop in the middle of swimming across the lake, just get to the other shore. And then you can go back in and, go over it however many times you need, but just get to the other side. So in other words, as you're searching for the truth of your experiences in writing, don't get hung up on spending too much time on a particular section or trying to figure out, do I need more here or less here? Because you will know by the point you get to the end and you go back in and work with it many times. You will have the opportunity to shade in more truth or less. So in Breaking the Ocean, again, my first memoir, there in the first, after I had written the first draft and I went back in, I realized that I had put in truths that were not necessary to the story and that felt like weren't fully mine to tell. And well, not fully mine to tell. So for example, I had written about a sibling's suicide attempt in Breaking the Ocean in one of the sections. And it was actually a later stage. I had it in until probably like the second, when it was with the publisher, and it was one of the last rounds of editing. And I took it out because, and I had checked with a sibling, because you always, if you're writing something like that, you want to check, but it felt unnecessary. And I thought, I don't want to expose their part of their journey in that way. And it felt unnecessarily, what's the word, like a little bit like I was trying to somehow say it was this hard when I didn't need to, because my own experiences were enough. So that was an example where I dialed back the truth element for a variety of reasons. There was another section where I realized that it was an earlier scene in the book, and it was a pretty heavy scene, where early on in my experience of moving to Canada, I was experiencing, like I said, overt racism and bullying in my school environment, which went on for a number of years. And it was a scene where my parents were called into the classroom in front of the teacher, and I was there with them, and the teacher kind of, which wouldn't hopefully happen in the same way today, but you know, we all know what happened in schools back then, went into explaining to my parents how the other students are complaining that Annahid smells. And she went on to kind of say more about that. And it was a pretty devastating moment for me as a child, clocking my parents' reactions and hearing this said about me. And in an earlier version of the book, I wrote about that and legitimized it and explaining. And I had written an explanation of why my parents, as new immigrants, wouldn't have been able to pay attention to hygiene in the same way. And I kind of almost legitimized what the students were saying, and realized later on, what am I doing? And I had to really sit with that scene and realize that that was a reflection, of course, of racism. And it was really painful to go, oh, it was that gross and legitimized to that extent by the institution that I was part of. And so I had to go in and put in more truth for that scene, which is, if you're writing memoir, so much of the process is an emotional process. You're working with yourself in order to write what feels truthful on the page. So that was an example where I had to go put more in, but just finish the draft is what I would say. And you're going to nuance truth all through in a way that really makes sense to you. And I would say it is helpful as well. You know, each of the pieces I've written, I wrote the first draft for each of them in about Breaking the Ocean, Bones of Belonging was a little bit more, a year and a half, but each of them in about a year and a half. And then it is really helpful to have at least a year in the composting period where you're going over. It's helpful as well to hire an external editor before you even go to potentially to your agent or to a publisher. 80% of books in Canada are direct to publisher. You don't need to have an agent. But either way, I would say get your manuscript to the best place it can get to, or your 3 chapters if you're submitting a shorter version of it. So it's really helpful if you can to give it to a handful of people you trust to read it and give feedback, or pay for an editor to give you feedback. So you can nuance the manuscript in ways that you want to before you kind of give it in. The third thing is, as you're digging for truth, follow the feelings. So where you find yourself experiencing the strongest emotion is often where the reader gold is. So trust that. In sections that you're writing about where you feel so-so, probably most likely the reader is going to feel so-so as well. So either you need to shorten that section, get rid of it entirely, or you need to dig a little bit deeper. I am going to give an example from Breaking the Ocean of a place in the writing early on where in the writing, I had so much emotion come up that I realized there was a whole piece that I didn't realize was part of the book. So I'm going to read that little section. I have only patchwork memories of my first 7 years in Iran. My father had 5 other siblings who at various times all had spouses or partners, so our regular family gatherings were high-volume affairs. On these occasions, my body would be squeezed like a loaf of fresh bread to cries of Dochta choshgel, pretty girl, and Cheli gashenge, very beautiful, while no exposed flesh was left unpinched. Persians are not known for social restraint. Before I could speak English or Farsi, I was immersed in the universal language of unconditional love and held in the center of a family tribe. As the oldest cousin and the ringleader, I was free to jump into whatever puddles of trouble appeared, secure in the knowledge that I would be dried off on the other side. On weekdays, I attended the English-speaking Rustam Abadi International School, where my mother worked. We had Farsi classes each morning as part of the curriculum, although I was competent in the language early on. I remember buying crusty flatbread sangak from a hole-in-the-wall one-man bakeries, watching as the steamy bread was pulled out of a stone wall oven, dotted across the top with small pebbles to prevent it from rising too high. There would be scuffling in the back seat all the way home as my siblings and I fought over the scraps. A piece secured with a stone was a bonus, extra ammunition. My mother would often take the three of us on nature walks in the hills behind our newly built mansion in northern Tehran, and we'd search for tadpoles to carry home in glass jars. There was no one else around during these times, only the four of us and the green-scented air. I remember a feeling of freedom and expansiveness that contrasted with the chaos of the city below. I'm going to skip forward. Once, when I was 6 years old, we visited Shiraz, the city where my grandparents met and fell in love. It was 1979, and I can recall in vivid detail the bazaar full of sparkling clothes, rainbow-colored spices, and woven carpets of all shapes and sizes, where the city's beggars sat with their hands outstretched for money. This is the Iran I remember, one of great extremes, often side by side, color and poverty, tiny stone bakeries and lavish mansions, crowded streets and open hills. There are 2 photos of me taken during this trip. I'm wearing traditional Qashqai nomadic dress. In one, my head is tipped to the side as I coyly stare up at the camera. In the other, I am nestled in my father's arms, mouth wide open, laughing. I have this outfit folded in a drawer now, the only physical object I have left from that time. I have no coherent narrative of my formative years in Iran, only these inchoate images appearing like bright quafish darting through the murky waters of memory. As an adult, I am left waiting, watching for flashes of gold, glimpses of the girl I once was in a land far away. Well, it still brings up emotion. When I was writing about my early years in Iran, I found myself every time I was in those scenes, I was in tears. And I realized what I hadn't fully realized before then, before the writing process, that as much as what I lost in the experience of racism when we moved to Canada was the loss of what I had left behind. And I didn't realize how big that hole was until I was writing about it. So where you have the strongest feelings come up, trust the feeling. And if you're not clear on what is there, just keep writing about it. Yeah, I don't need to say more about that. What do you reveal? That's a big question. What do you reveal in the process of digging for truth? There's no one answer to that question. I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. I think writing memoir is the most courageous genre of writing to be engaged in. So if you're going to write memoir, there's no way around the fact that you're revealing vulnerability. You have to reveal enough vulnerability to make it worth the reader's time. There's memoirs that I've read that I think, oh my God, that was just a waste of 2 hours of my time, because I can tell they're protecting themselves, or they're protecting too much of their family, so having said that, you don't need to reveal every vulnerable area of your life, but I would say you got to reveal enough that it moves the reader and it teaches the reader something that they didn't think about before. That scene that I described earlier to you, where I had to go back in and reveal more truth in that classroom, it was a really incredibly tender scene to write. And I did think about taking it out because I also, in my day job, I'm CEO of an inclusion company. I'm in front of clients all the time. I make conscious choices about writing vulnerably because I'm really clear about why I'm writing. And I think story reaches people in a way that facts don't. And I had to really pull up my emotional pants and make the courageous choice to leave certain scenes in because they revealed the impact in a way that if I'd taken them out, it wouldn't have. So that's, you make those choices. How do we make the choices about what we reveal about others? I think that we can reveal experiences that happen to others if we're talking about the impact on ourselves. And we have to do that to a certain extent because our story is always a composite of the relationships that we're part of. But we can choose to what extent. So I gave the example earlier where I dialed back sharing the experience of a suicide attempt on the part of a sibling because it wasn't necessary. I talk a lot about my relationship with my father in the first memoir. And that was I had to really wrestle with how much to reveal in that because I didn't, it was necessary to my story. I had to talk about my father's reaction to racism because it so deeply impacted my own response. But I also didn't want to expose him as a brown immigrant Muslim man and put him into the stereotypes that exist for men of his identity, where the stereotype is that those men are angry and they're irrational and they're just. So when I was figuring out what to reveal, I did not reveal the extent of some of the abuse that happened. And I also made sure that I put his behavior into context. So I had to really think about how do I talk about the truth of our relationship and its impact on me in a way that reveals enough, but doesn't put him at risk to sort of be put into a category. So a lot of you know, working with truth is figuring out how do you do the best job revealing truth that will teach the reader something, but not expose too much of your relationships. And only you can decide that. I would say, though, figure out what your preference is and what you reveal first. Write the first few drafts before you share it with anyone else in your life, because you'll get a lot of feedback from people. And writing a memoir is not a task, a project by committee. It's really it's something you're writing and you're standing behind. I actually didn't share the manuscript for Breaking the Ocean until I was in the second, like it was going to be printed. I was sort of in the before the very, very final sign-off draft. And that was because I didn't want, I gave it to other people in my life that I really, really trust to help me make good judgment calls. But I knew that it would trigger certain family relationships, and I didn't want to be dealing with having to explain why. And so I gave it to them at the end, and had to work with some of that. Which gets me to my final theme: be prepared for the backlash or the lashback. I don't think we can write about truth in our own lives or in our families without upsetting people. And certain themes bring up more backlash or lashback than others. But I think there's always a certain amount of it. Breaking the Ocean, it's funny because I do this work for a living, so you'd think people would know that these are issues I talk about all the time. But Breaking the Ocean felt like a coming out of the closet in a way where I talked so viscerally and real and vulnerably about the impact of racism on my own and my family's life. And if you've read the book, in a kind of no holds barred way, although, as I've said to you, I made conscious choices about how much to reveal throughout. What happened after I wrote it? Well, I think I thought that the truth would set me free. And here's the thing, it does. Um, Although I don't think we write memoir or our personal truths as a form of therapy, it does have cathartic effect. When we write, I remember hearing, and I think this is very, very true, a truth that comes out of psychology. The point at which you're able to tell your story is a point of which you're largely free of it. And I do think that is true. Like, there is a cathartic element when you can see your story and put your elements of your life into perspective. They don't hold you in the same way. But then there's writing is kind of like pregnancy. Like the part where you're holding the child is like the tiny part of the journey of parenting. The writing of your memoir or your book is a much smaller component of then having to front it in the book tour and in all the relationships in your life. So I was surprised. I was surprised by my family, my extended family. I don't think anyone has raised the book with me, which I found really strange. So it's kind of this my siblings I had conversations about with it, and my one of my parents, but beyond that, it kind of sits as a unspoken thing that, and I've talked to other writers enough to know that that's like kind of what happens. Like, you speak truth and then you kind of hit silence, which is, I think, why we write, because our family system and the broader societal system is set up to silence certain truths because they disrupt the system. They're meant to create change in the system. And so don't expect people to be thankful or even engage with you around this thing that you have burst into the world, often with great effort and courage. I lost two. We all have a circle of intimate closest friends, and I had a circle, I would say 4 or 5 of them, and 2 of them I lost after I wrote the book, because race wasn't a central part of our relationship a central part of my relationship with them. We connected on other things, and I think it made them really uncomfortable. And in that intimate circle, I didn't want to accept silence around such a core part of my experience. So I lost relationships that were really close in my life. And the last impact I'll talk to, I was ready for weird things to happen in the broader reading world, because I do that. I kind of experienced that in my job. I knew writing about race would be uncomfortable for people, but I just didn't expect the extent of it in my social circles. The last area of impact for me was in my immediate environment. We were close with neighbors in the area. After this book came out, I had all kinds of weird responses, to the extent to which I have realized in retrospect, I made people uncomfortable. And I have the kind of relationship now where I say hello and I'm polite, but I'm no longer intimately involved in people's lives in the neighborhood around me, which is middle class, white dominant. Probably, again, I should have anticipated, but I didn't. So be prepared to, in the process of sharing your truth, to hold, not everybody will be able to hold it. And some of those people will be people that you hoped or expected would. And that's part of the, I think we make a choice to stand more fully in ourselves, and not everybody, when we reclaim that power, take the power back to tell our own story, we need to be okay with losing parts of our comfort in the process. And ultimately, I'm okay with it, although it still causes regret in moments. I don't want people in my life that can't see me for the parts that I've written about. Okay, that brings me to the end of my 5 tips, and I'm going to open it up for questions and comments, and I'm going to go back to just see to what people have put into chat. I think Tonisha, is that right? Oh, sorry, Janisha. I'm so sorry, Janisha. I didn't
No
see.
worries.
So the book links are put into the chat there if you want to check them out. So going back to the top, am I trying to do too much by including my memoirs and my family history? Mary, can you speak to that? I'm not sure I understand fully what you're meaning by that, if you're still here. This is the first question up at the top. Okay. Oh, can you hold? Okay, the chart. Okay, this is loosely, it's helpful to have your theme, structure, and then what sub-themes you're weaving through. If you want to take a picture. And then the 2 examples for breaking the ocean. The theme was racial trauma. I broke it chronologically into three parts of my life. And then I had the themes that I wove through. And then for Bones of Belonging, it was a different structure. And so part of what I did in the editing process actually was I went back into each of the pieces I'd written and thought, do I have enough of these themes, sub-themes here? And do each of these illustrate a different relationship to belonging? Have I talked about that enough? So it kind of allowed me to check in on the truths that I wanted to polish up and reveal. Okay. Tips for finding an editor. Okay. That's a really good question. Just like in any area, it really helps to have relationships to knock on, to, or like relational doors to knock on that can help us gain entry. So your first decision is, am I going to find an agent for this book or not? Usually agents are helpful if we want to publish more than one book, or we want to find a publisher outside of Canada, because it's hard to go direct to publishers in the US, or other countries, although you can do that, or whatever your country of where you live is. An agent, of course, can help because they have stronger relationships to publishers, so they can knock on those doors. However, I've said that in most Western democracies, well, at least from what I know, Canada, the US, and the UK, the majority of books go straight to the publisher without necessarily going to the agent. So you can try that avenue first. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back and find an agent, or you can go try and find an agent. If you don't get a positive response, you can then go direct to the publisher. What was I going to say? You can cultivate those relationships by going to literary festivals. And in fact, the Fold, I want to say a huge thank you. If the Fold didn't exist, I don't know if I would be where I'm at in my own writing journey. So the Fold was one of the first literary festivals that we're going to really consciously front diverse authors, and we're going to connect them to industry leaders. So at each of the festivals, there were industry panelists, agents, publishers, blah, 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 other writers. And it was at the Fold Festival in 2018 that I saw someone on a panel that was that worked for the publisher that I eventually published with. And so, of course, you have to write your book proposal. There's many templates for that. Polish it up as much as you can. A really key tip in writing your book proposal: authors have to do so much more of their own promotion than authors than they had to do, I'd say even 10 years ago. So as part of your book proposal, you really want to write up what you're going to be able to do to promote the book in addition to what the publisher is doing. Make sure that section is really well thought out and strengthened. So building your social media following, creating your own website if you can, is helpful for your proposal. So you've kind of got your proposal polished up. And what I did was I sent an email to this person I met at the Fold Festival that worked for Anansi, House of Anansi, which published my first book. And she connected me to one of the editors. And then I submitted my proposal. Feedback was it was really good, but the book was a little bit too short. So ideally you want if you're writing memoir, to be between 70 and 85 to 90,000 words. My book initially was 60,000. So I went back in and I wrote a whole bunch more. And then I went back and submitted it to him when it was around 75,000. And then you can, if you don't have an agent, you can be your own agent, where if it's well written, no publisher wants to miss out on a really good book. So I sent it to 2 or 3 publishers. I got an early yes from another publisher. And then I leveraged that to go back to Anansi and say, hey, I've had a yes. If you can, give me an indication in the next little while, that would be, or like next 2 to 3 weeks, that would be great. And I got a response within 2 weeks. So you can basically, if you don't get a professional agent, you can kind of develop relationships and sort of act a little bit as your own agent. In Canada, there's a list of what is it? I don't want to get this wrong, but 150 independent publishers. So you can kind of go through, like, what are your top 5, send it out to them. Publishing is really a waiting game. It takes a long time. So don't expect a fast response. So you can send it. It is helpful if you can send directly to an editor, which is why going to some of the literary events can help. You can also reach out to other writers. Don't be afraid to ask. You can ask somebody who's written a book, hey, would you be willing to, or reach out through social media? I've written a book on this topic. Do you know any publishers that might be interested? Would you be willing to make an introduction for me? So you can make those requests. It is easier to go directly to an editor than to go through the open query process, if you have access to that. So that would be what I'd recommend. And then if you're going to an agent, you can also shortlist your top 5 agents. Usually helpful with your first book to get an agent in the same country. And then if they say no, then ask them what agent they might recommend. But back to my point, publishing is a waiting game. It can take a couple months to hear back from an agent. It can take a couple months to hear back from any publisher. So don't be afraid to check back with whoever you've sent it to. Kind of stay on it. Like, not to be a pest, but just don't be afraid to ask, hey, have you had a chance to look at blah, blah, blah. Someone has said, I'm an editor and writer. Here is I have a memoir coming up to edit and can give tips to know who's right for you too. Wonderful. Great. Oh, great. And there's a couple people here that are memoir editors. That's so fantastic. Great. Professional Editors Association Online. Fantastic. Yeah. Lots of editors on LinkedIn, and publishers are on LinkedIn. So that's a good place to go and connect with people as well. Oh, there's lots of good links in here. Oh, I'm from Shiraz. This is a beautiful description of the city. Oh, thank you so much, Parveen. That means a lot to me, from somebody who knows the city. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone want to speak up verbally and to just say anything? I don't know, Janisha, do we have access to be able to hear people, or does it have to come through chat?
Somebody had their hand raised. Oh, okay, yes. So Carly should be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for this. This is really helpful and interesting. I'm glad to be able to ask the question, because I tried to type it out and it became like an essay. So the question is something to do with, who are we writing for? Like, I feel like I'm right at the point where I have some time. I've had a book in me for a long time. I write in a way that is very therapeutic for myself and joyful sometimes, or painful, but it's for me. But then I also know in the past when I've written for audiences, I think about who I'm writing for. So what I'm trying to say is, how do you navigate that balance between being authentic, writing for yourself, following your creative instincts and all of that, but also still keeping in mind who your audience is, what you are trying to offer them or give to them? Because I know that that's important, and yet I don't want that to hold me back. And I also don't, I can tell there's a part of me that just wants to be accepted or understood and liked. And I don't think that will bring out the best writing.
Yeah, I would say not to worry too much about who the audience is in the first draft. Like in the first draft, you want to kind of tap into the raw, unfiltered truth as much as you can. And then in later iterations, you can go in and figure out, what do we need to put more context around for potential readers? So for example, I had to, I'm talking about the reality of racism and immigration. I had to go in and, pad certain sections out because I knew folks would be reading it that wouldn't have that in place. But yeah, I would say finish the first draft. And ultimately, I think we write the book, many of us, that we want to read ourselves. So I think in a certain way, our primary audience are like avatars of kind of who we are, whether that's generationally or because of a certain part of our identity or something we do in the world, like other advocates or activists. But I'd say for the first draft, Carly, like just trust your voice and your own story. And I think many of us, like our inner critic, for me, when I was writing Breaking the Ocean, the inner critic, and our inner critic is really smart. It talks back to us in ways that we can hold ourselves back for all kinds of reasons. Oh, for me, one of the voices of the inner critic, Carly, was, who's your audience? Who's going to read this? You don't know enough about this to be writing about it. Or this is so like that other book, like what, those other two books that came out, what differentiates it? And I had to really let go of all of that and trust that this deep need to write my story was because it was going to be useful in the world. So I'd just say, are you done the first draft?
No, I don't know if you can still hear me. No, but I've been journaling and writing creatively for the last couple of years. So I feel like the pen is wet, but I'm just about to start writing the first draft.
Yeah, well, I know you a little bit, and I think you just got to dive into those waters, go as deep as you can, be as raw as you can, and trust your voice. Ultimately, memoir is our most deepest, powerful voice. So to that, and then you can always shove stuff in after. I mean, I added 20,000 words to the later version. So yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I really appreciate that. And just thinking about making a safe space, just do it. Doesn't matter who the audience is at the beginning because they're not there at the beginning.
That's right. That's right. And it's true. We are often our own harshest critic. So yeah, just try and get rid of that critic voice. It's really not helpful. It's really not helpful.
Thank you.
And just, I think we're at time. I'm happy to stay on for a couple minutes, but I do want to just close and say, for people that have to go, thank you for joining today. If you want to grab a copy, Bones of Belonging, I think, is a really great, if I may say so myself, read, an example of kind of mixing in slightly different writing forms. And I want to just say that stories are ultimately what moves humanity forward. And if you have an impulse to write, trust it and hold it with great protection and courage. And feel free to reach out to myself and others, and go to the Fold Festival to help you on that process as well. Thank you for joining me today.
If you wanted to answer any more questions, you're free to.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can go on for a little bit. There are two people who have their hand raised.
Oh, great. Okay, super. Okay.
So I'll do that.
Okay. Is it?
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, this is Mary. Hi. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry. It's my question was so hard to form. So, what I meant was that I have two things going on in my book, a memoir, and also I had researched the history of how my family took 30 years to build the first mosque in New England. So the two elements are kind of hard to blend, and the voice is different in both of them, and I'm just not comfortable I tried to make them fit and interweave them, but I just don't know. It feels like I'm trying to do too much, and maybe your
Mm.
bones of belonging will help me to accept the different voices. What do you think?
Yeah, it does a little bit sound like they might be two separate things. Like, what did the building of the mosque, how did it change something for you? What was the meaning in that for you? What did you discover or reclaim in yourself as a result of that process? And for sure, you can marry in bits of the history, but I agree it would be a sub theme, the history of the building of the mosque or whatever, like the more information about that, as opposed to if you write a separate book about documenting that. You can still fit, as long as it's like whatever you're sharing about the research is connected to a revelation or a discovery or something that was integral to your own journey, you can bring it in. But if it's outside of that, like I had to write about in my memoir some of the history of the revolution in Iran because I needed people to understand why we left, how sudden it was, how shocking it was, how, like most people that were forced, that had were able to leave, how it was, it was just an unexpected sudden thing that happened. It wasn't a slow building process by any means. So I had to put enough of that history in, but it was, I think it's a short little subsection, like 3 pages in order to serve the story. In your case, it sounds like you could pull in more because you're writing about, or you parallel the building of the mosque to something that you're building in your own personal life. But yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good enough.
Answer.
Good enough. That's very helpful. Thank you. And it's wonderful to be able to hear you and get this help. Thanks so much. Many blessings.
My pleasure. And you're also welcome to reach out to me. I have a website that I'm going to just put here, AnnahidDashtgard.com. And if you want to reach out, whoops, I missed the com. You're welcome to. And I have a newsletter there too that you're welcome to check out. Any other questions or
There are 2 more questions. People who
Okay.
have raised hands. Do you want to answer those 2?
Sure. Yeah. Rhonda.
Yes, hello. I'd like to go back a little bit to when you were talking about how you decide how to tell others' stories. What I'm working on is a series of essays about my lifelong, going on 3 decades struggle with mental wellness and often lack of. And some of my truths revolve around family secrets. Some of my struggles stem from struggles that happened in the generation before me. And one of the big concerns I have is, where does my right to tell my story intersect with my family's right to protect their stories? And this is something I'm really struggling with. And because this is something my family does not really talk about, I can't simply go say, hey, I want to tell my story. Are you willing to let me do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The point that I feel I need to.
How strong is the urge to write this story for you, Rhonda?
It's pretty strong. My struggle with mental health, when I talk about it, people tell me how it helps them also, and it
Mm.
does help me.
Yeah.
And so it does feel pretty important to talk about for several reasons.
Yeah. Well, I'd say you go, and I'm speaking figuratively here, into your writing room, you close the door. None of your ancestors or family members get to come in until you finish the first draft. Like what I'm hearing in your question is there's a story that keeps returning that wants to be told. And I think you need to sit down and tell it, as I was saying to Carly, in the truest, most vulnerable, most honest way you can. And then you can decide if you publish, what you keep in, how much you want to protect people afterward.
Okay. So just get it out, which a lot of
Get it out.
yeah, a lot of it's there, the essays, a lot have been written. It's just a matter of now what to do with those. So, okay.
Yeah. And then you also have to make choices, because you are not, like I said earlier, you can't publish memoir, I don't think, and please everybody in your life. So it may also be a process of you're making choices of what you reveal, knowing that it may impact your relationships. And then you're making choices about how much impact can you withstand, what relationships maybe are you potentially willing to lose in order to stand with this truth. And there's nobody that can answer that but you.
Yeah.
I will refer to Judy Rebick is a good friend of mine, and she wrote the memoir Heroes in My Head about her early experiences with childhood sexual abuse. And even though she's been a public figurehead for years and years and years in Canada, it was the first book talking about her early experiences. Both her parents have passed on, but no one in her family talks to her about the book, but it was an important enough story for her to tell it, and she was okay with that. And that's another example. But an incredibly powerful book about somebody that was so publicly strong facing, and I think touched many, many lives, people that struggle with mental health because of sexual abuse. So Rhonda, yeah, I support you. Like, when we speak our truth, it does affect people we don't know.
Right.
The trade-off is we may piss off people that we do know. So
Could you write that author's name in the chat so I can check the book out? And thank
Yeah.
you so much. This has been a great hour. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I can't see Annahid's website or email. Janisha, do you mind just putting that in? You can just put the link in. Or I can just here. I'm going to put the link in here. There we go. Any last questions?
Yes, so there's one more.
Lynn. Oh no, is it Lynn?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I put this question in the Q&A and I'll just read it out, but thank you for your gems of wisdom for this talk, and specifically based on your two books and how different you chose your structure. And that's where I'm at right now, is my container. And so my question is, how could you discuss a bit the benefits and possible difficulties personally and as a writer, which you kind of have already, but I'm trying to choose creative nonfiction over memoir.
Mm-hmm. So what's the question? How would the structure be different?
What could be the benefits personally and as a writer for, I guess, more freedom in terms of what is stories that are being told, if it's as creative nonfiction over a strict memoir?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I mean, to me, and I'm not the expert on this by any means, but creative nonfiction is that you're it's not life story, it's much more curated. So you're writing in like you could just write like a series of essays. You could, what's that one by Leanne? This one, which Leanne Simpson, which is quite genre wise, more out there. So anyway, you can take more liberty. You don't have to. So what are the benefits? I think you get to curate and choose specific themes that you can be a little bit more creative about. Memoir is a little bit more tied to, here's my life story, whether it's chronological or achronological. So if there's a set of, like Sarah Polly's book, she writes about very particular themes that just pull out sort of threads from her life. So I guess it depends what you're wanting to write and also what is being called to write. Like Bones of Belonging is a much more curated collection, but I couldn't have written this one without first writing the memoir. But that's just me. Like I had to write the story, and then I could curate more intentionally the themes and pull out just threads around a broader journey of belonging that every human being is on. But I had to write the other one first. Hopefully that is helpful.
Yes, because I was thinking along the lines of with the creative nonfiction, is looking at it as also in the sense that someone's memories you wonder if are they part of other people's memories, and they're always missing pieces to a story. So, or if you are writing about, for example, I'll give an example, like I'm writing both my mother's and my maternal grandmother's story. My mother's no longer with me, but my maternal grandmother left when she was 3 years old. So I'm giving her my an imagined story, not knowing her life.
Right. And you want to do that. Well, and you want to do it through nonfiction, not fiction?
Yes.
Well, it's hard to it's hard to kind of exactly answer that question without seeing more of the rough material. But again, Lynn, I would say play around with a couple different formats, because it may not be immediately obvious which one feels most right. There's another writer friend of mine, actually, oh God, why am I blanking on her name? Jen Wills, who won the a prize for her first memoir, which I'm also blanking on the name of. Anyway, she had written that initially as a fictional a novel, and got back from the editor that it needed to be nonfiction. So then she kind of rewrote it as a memoir, and played a little bit with a structure. So it's written in a little bit, it's not chronological. It's sort of written in a little bit more, it's written more creatively. So experiment, figure out the format that works best for you right now. And that also may shift based on an agent or an editor's feedback.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I would just, the question that I would ask, Lynn, is what structure is really going to serve what I want to write best? The theme or the idea that I want to write about, or this person's life, what will best serve getting that across? Yeah. Okay.
Hello. Thank you so much, Annahid, for being with us today. And yeah, this was an amazing workshop. I can tell in the comments that people really enjoyed this and took a lot out of it. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm just gonna kind of do the little outro.
I bet you're a writer too, Janisha. Is that right? I just have to ask.
I am.
Yes, of course you are. Have you published anything?
Not yet, but
It's coming.
working on it.
Coming.
Yeah. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Annahid, again. And thank you to everyone who attended. The recording for today's session will be emailed to you within the week. Have a great rest of your day and weekend, and we hope to see you at more Fold Academies. Bye.